Welcome to the first episode of Tech Conversations about Techs or Technologies, EQ. Today, I'm delighted but somewhat anxious about a conversation that we're going to have because it brings on so many different feelings given how timely it is. I want to talk about the power of community engagement in product development, but as part of the public safety conversation and the role that technology is going to have more and more in defining what that means is, as I said, a timely and important conversation, especially for the impact it has on underrepresented communities who have been disproportionately affected by tragic events during the past couple of years here in the US. Community policing is a philosophy and a practice of police work that emphasizes really the collaboration between police and the community. It's about trust, it's about problem solving, and requires fundamental changes to ethics and how really police work is measured and kept accountable. Ethics and equity are two fundamental values that are baked into Axon DNA. Axon is a software and technology company in the public safety sphere. For most people, Axon is the taser company. And today I am delighted to have Regina Holloway, who is the VP of Global Strategic Community Impact at Axon. But most of all, Regina has an amazing career that started out as senior program manager at the policing project at NYU School of Law, where she helped implement the neighborhood policing initiative in the city of Chicago. Prior to that, she worked as a supervising investigator with the Civilian Office of Police Accountability in Chicago. And she's done so much work in really bringing together the community and not just police, but now the work that she's doing at Axon. So please help me welcome Regina to this amazing conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to meet you.
Lovely to have you. And I am so grateful for the time that you gave us today. I'm excited because it's not very often that I have someone that has such a broad career experience that speaks exactly to what we need in tech, which is, a different kind of background that is helping where technology is going today. And I'd love to start, if you don't mind, with the part of your career was working with new policemen. So really police officers that are new to the job. And I was curious because we often talk about what is wrong with police, and there's a lot that is wrong with police in this country. But I'm curious, what was the perspective that you felt these new recruits were having, especially as it pertains to their role of serving the community?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think of it in many different ways. So the first thing that brings to mind for me is I'm probably going to go a little off script and you're going to say, how does this relate? But I'm going to bring it home.
Nope, I'm here to listen.
So there's this famous hip hop artist named Mos Def, and he always talks about, people always say, where is hip hop? And it's like hip hop is where we are. Likewise, policing is where we are. It's where the country is. It's not just about singling out police. It's like they're part of this greater whole. And I think a lot of the problems and the accomplishments that you see in policing are kind of the problems and the accomplishments that you see in our country right now. So when I think about those officers, I think about my own children, because I have a daughter that's 28 and a daughter that's 21. I think about their ideas of what careers are available to them, the economy that we live in, their ability to get education that's affordable, all of these sort of things, right? It's like that's where the country is. And so we have officers that are coming from all different types of places. I think I'm most experienced with officers from big cities. You know, I grew up in Philadelphia, I've lived on the Northeast and now in Chicago. And so you have a lot of officers, especially officers of color, that have experienced poor policing in their cities and really see themselves as these kids on the street and like see themselves as like, how can I make this experience better for them? How can I make them feel part of public safety? And that's their entire drive to policing. You have other officers that are maybe the first in their family to be a part of a profession and really, really want to make their family proud and think about like how they can move up in the ranks. You have officers that are needing education and couldn't necessarily afford it. You have officers coming from the military. So like I said, I think it's like you're seeing officers in the same sphere that you see any young person in this day and age and what they're trying to accomplish. I think it's hard because the training that officers are receiving and the funding that these departments have in terms of training needs a lot of work and a lot to be desired. So you see these sort of fresh faces out there in the world who start off really wanting to make a huge difference for the most part, I would say. And, you know, and they're becoming a part of this profession that is not necessarily working in their favor, is how I would describe it. So, I mean, that was my experience coming into civilian oversight, where we have shootings and maybe young officers really new to the job as part of these incidents and really destroyed a lot of times by these incidents. You know, we hear about sometimes horrible incidents that were not made with the right decisions, but there are a lot of incidents that happen within the law, and those incidents are no less damaging to those officers and those communities, if that makes sense. So these are all of the sort of things. I don't know that I have an answer. These are the things that I'm thinking about when I think about young officers on the street right now, especially in big cities.
I love what you said about the fact that basically they're not set up to win as far as the environment they're in, and because I think that that is true for a lot of professions where the way that you're measured and rewarded doesn't necessarily set you up to do your best work. And here we are in a profession where that actually, can be devastating to a community or individual. So I think there's a lot of truth there that, as far as we're talking about defunding the police and funding differently, maybe is a better way of talking about it, or really putting the effort on, as you said, training that is not necessarily where the best effort is put. I'm curious when you're looking at it from a community perspective, obviously for community policing to work, trust is fundamental. And there's no trust if there is a perception, which most often than not is a reality, of confirmation bias. And so the idea that we would be looking for data and information that validates preconceptions and attitudes and beliefs that we're drilled in. And my concern is that as we have more devices, more camera, when we have AI come into play that works on models that are flawed because of lack of data, or data that perpetrates that preconception, that confirmation bias is really hard to avoid. I'm curious how you're thinking about that, especially given that you have a solution, which is an app that helps with bringing, some of that data and information into investigations.
Sure. I think the key here is that, number one, I love that you mentioned, as far as like officers and the limitations. I think this ties into that. These solutions are meant to help officers. Technology is meant to help public safety, make it more efficient, give folks more time, more space, all of these sort of things. So I think we're going to see, and we're going to want to think about how technology can bridge these gaps. But at the end of the day, to your point, we need policies and procedures around technology to make sure it is functioning for everyone, and to make sure that confirmation bias is somehow triggered for a department or for a tech company to say, how can we build checks and balances to make sure this doesn't happen? So in the particular app that you're talking about, we want folks to be able to have the option to opt in and say, I have this information of something that happened that I think is criminal, and I want to be able to share that with you. But it doesn't mean that it's going to give the officer an option to extract that data without you opting in. And you can flag that data to say, like, yes, I want to share, or no, I don't. The larger problem that you're describing with confirmation bias, which to your point, you'll find in any industry and in possibly everyone, is just a greater problem. And I'm not trying to downplay it, but is a greater problem of systemic racism in our society that will neither be solved by technology, but can be used. We can use technology in this platform, just as you're doing right now, and I'm thankful for it, to have these discussions around what are the policies that we need to make community feel safe. How can we bring community to the table to be a part of this decision-making process? And how do we sort of insert that voice into technology while it's being built and before it's built, to say, hey, you want to think of these things? And I think that's what we're trying to do, and do well.
Yeah, I agree totally with you. It's about mitigating. It's not about eradicating, bias, because I think that, although I wish it was true, it's not so simple, right? And so I think mitigating and being aware, and so raising that awareness of what is your bias. We were discussing as we were prepping about, if there is an incident and I only looking for people that are wearing a hoodie versus somebody that is wearing a suit, that is my bias kicking in, right? And so the information that I will provide will be biased. I was very surprised by a study that Axon has run in the US around propensity of people to provide home camera system footage to law enforcement. And you had 77% of people that you polled support the idea of allowing community members to share footage from their camera. And another 72% supports the idea of law enforcement being able to proactively request such footage. That was surprising to me, because generally, the commentary is fairly negative around this. I'm curious if there's more that you can share on this study.
Absolutely. So 1,000 folks were polled, 18 and older, all different genders and races, ethnicities. But I think like two things are happening at once. I think we're seeing in society that people do have a deep concern about safety. So they want to be safer. And so they want technology that is going to help equip them with an ability for their house to be safe, for themselves to be safe, and their families. That's going to be number one for most people, regardless of where you live. And I do still think at the same time as wanting that, you do have folks that of responders who were not as favorable. You're going to find people that are younger and non-white. And why? Because we're always going to look back to, where has this trust been broken in these communities in particular. But I think even amongst those people, and we did put this product before our Ethics and Equity Advisory Council, you can have these two things happening at once, which is we want our communities to be safer too. And yet we do have a concern about what this can mean for our communities that are disproportionately surveilled. And so I think that what we need to do again is just to look at those concerns and figure out what can we build into technology to make sure that these communities do feel safe and still have access to being safer. And so I think it's always going to be this give and take that's never going to end, of finding out what the middle ground is between making these communities safer, but also making them feel safe and making them feel part of the process.
And I love that, because I think oftentimes we talk about safety as something that happens to the community, but without the community involvement, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And that's where we need to change it. You said this community want to be safer, but that concerned about just feeding into that bias is there and is a reality. And so how do we break that, right? So that it doesn't feel like you're making a compromise between your safety as a community and continue to feed into a bias that is already there about you.
Right.
And it's not easy.
It's not easy. And I think it has to happen at every level. It has to happen within a technology company. And that's the work that our team does and that the EEAC does. And it has to happen at the policing level in communities. And I've seen that work here in Chicago. It's, we have this value at Axon, expect candor. There has to be this ability to tell the truth about the situation and the uncomfortableness of it. And there still has to be the ability for all of us to sit down together at the table and say, like, we're going to share power on this. And we're going to share resources to come to a good answer. And it's not going to be necessarily fun, but it's necessary for all of us to get to a better place. And I think that's really the core of the work that our team does and the core of the work that I hope will be done on the ground more.
Sharing power, that's a very strong statement. And I think that is true, right? That there is power on both sides, the policing side and the community side, and that needs to be more leveled between the two. I'm curious, I was looking at part of some of the initiatives that Axon has had over time. And I said at the beginning, most people know Axon from the taser. And there was a suggestion of actually arming drones with tasers to deploy on school grounds to help respond to mass shooting. And unfortunately, we're coming not in a school, but there's been another mass shooting just this week at a university campus. So, and that was not brought to fruition to market because the ethic board that you're part of said there was the risk for abuse was too high. Mm-hmm. Did the community feedback come into that? How did you go about kind of assessing the product?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll tell you is that this idea of a taser drone is an idea that stems out of the deep concern that we have with not just mass shootings, but also natural disasters. How can technology be used to help us when we can't get to a place? Or how can technology help us when we need more time and space, keeping both officers safer and community members safer, right, with less lethal technology? And, our CEO, what's amazing about him just as a person is that he's a huge innovator. He's a very passionate person. So I think his idea that we have to keep thinking about how we're going to utilize technology to create this time and space that we're talking about, that is actually the ideal. We always talk about this in terms of oversight, time and space. How are we giving officers more time and more space? I think that fundamentally, this technology in terms of drones in public safety will be something that will be developed just because that's what technology does, right? It evolves and it uses these tools so that we can get to a better place. So the AI Ethics Board, number one, existed at the same time as our EEAC. Our EEAC at the time was called a Community Advisory Coalition. It differed from the AI Ethics Board in a few ways. I think that there's more lived experience on the Community Advisory Board, now the EEAC. So these are folks that, yes, have PhDs, yes, have maybe academic experience or experience at the highest level of a nonprofit or an organization that's working for civil rights, but also maybe looks more like the communities that disproportionately have experiences with police, mm-hmm. and or have experienced some form of the criminal justice ecosystem. And so have this really, really important lived experience. When that AI Ethics Board that was not led by me decided to quit, I think the first thing that's really interesting that I think is super important to understand is that our EEAC, which was around at the time, couldn't quit this work. We can't quit this work because it entails our families and our children. And it's not work that we're willing to say we're not going to come to the table anymore and talk about. So I think that that is an act of privilege. I'm going to be frank with you, to be able to quit this work and say, I don't like the way the conversation goes. I can tell you that the irony is that Rick, and I really do feel like I need to stand up for him for a second, you can always talk to Rick. I think that conversation is never closed. I think we have the most candid conversations at Axon and in community where Rick has to sit and listen to community members say, this is why I don't agree with this. You have to do this better. Have you thought of this? It's not always nice conversations, and he's always willing to do that. So I think what you're seeing with the AI Ethics Board is a complicated situation of people leaving a conversation with a company that was open to that conversation, and with folks who now are taking on this work that can't leave this conversation. Does that make sense?
It does. If I can kind of summarize what you're saying is, one, you need a leader who's willing to listen, which
Yes.
you have. You have to acknowledge your privilege, but this is not something you can quit, but is an important work that needs to be done because communities are impacted from it. The open-mindedness of listening and rethinking a product because of ramification that maybe you didn't think about because of where you coming from. My husband always reminds me that between the two of us, I'm the only one who would park the car next to a car whose alarm is going off. We would never do that. And we joke about this because it's like, yep, still white. Because, or looking for something in my purse in the middle of a supermarket, things that my privilege allows me to do that somebody else can't. And the last one that I think is fascinating about what you're saying as well is especially true about technology, that, your PhDs and your amazing accomplishment from a, like a structured knowledge perspective go only thus far, right? That you need lived experiences to actually be able to bring that to the conversation. And I feel that from a technology perspective, we are in more need of that now than we've ever been before. Did I understand the kind of a key parts?
Yes, I think like what makes me, if I have expertise, what makes me an expert in public safety is my lived experience, is that I grew up a good portion of my young life in West Philadelphia during the crack cocaine epidemic. It's that I know what policing looks like for the communities that are in dire need of good policing. It's, these other experiences are great. They build skills, but the core of who I am and what makes me have passion for this work is where I come from, and that closeness and proximity to public safety.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like you mentioned Philadelphia twice now, and I feel I need to say sorry, given where we're coming from the recent Super Bowl, but that's that's digressing. Two questions for you that I know that we're running out of time. One is, how are you able, from a company perspective, this is a bit of a curveball, but to, in a way, disassociate the products that people know you from that have been weaponized to the work that you're trying to do? And I know that others have a much easier way of doing that, right, than you do, but especially because of, how certain not incidents, because I think is a disservice to the loss of life, but some of the murders that have happened are portrayed, and the taser comes in, and the taser is, yes, it was what did it, but it wasn't the taser in isolation. So are you able to disjoint these two things so that your community work can continue? Or people just understand that, and so it's not even a question?
No, I think it's layered. I think there are conversations that still need to be had. So I want to make sure that I'm hearing your question right and I'm answering it. But what I felt from what you described was the fact that, yes, less lethal technology is needed. I mean, I worked in civilian oversight in the city of Chicago. You know, the first thing that we ask an officer after a shooting, after his name, et cetera, is why didn't you deploy your taser if the taser wasn't deployed, right? We want to think about the sanctity of life, and do we have tools on the street for officers so that if it's legal, if it's within policy, if it's necessary, that we have a less lethal option to allow for everyone to go home safe. That being said, we still have to look at everything that we make and say, are there certain things that could be used? Can this tool be used to harm individuals? And I think the answer is, of course, right? It could be used in that way in the wrong hands or with the wrong training. And so I think this is where stories become really crucial in understanding on both sides. I think that you can have, it's kind of like what I said about the community and the ability to deliver evidence. Two things can be true at the same time. We can desperately need tools and less lethal technology, and we still can be concerned about how those tools can be misused. And we have to be aware of the policies and the procedures and the engagement and the community voice that's needed around every tool that goes into a community to make sure that it is used in the safest way possible, and that misuse is minimized or curtailed completely. Does that answer? I want to make sure I'm in line.
Yeah, and I think that the next step from that, I think that was a great differentiation that you're pointed to from a tool perspective. My question was also, okay, when that abuse comes in, can people still trust you as a brand when you reach out to them, or they see you as part of the problem because it was your taser that armed a member of the community?
Yeah, I think as you can imagine, it breaks my heart whenever our products are used in that way, but they're being misused. I think that's the key. So that
I
a
agree.
lot of things could be misused, right? Whether that is a baton, whether that's your foot, whether that's
Yep.
your fist. And so I think what we need to fight for is not to say we need to abolish technology that can further assist with the less lethal capability that we know that we need on the community side. But absolutely, communities should demand from their local elected officials and from their departments policies that will, wrap around these tools to make them safer.
Yeah,
I hope
I
you don't feel
could
like I'm
not
abusing
agree
it.
more.
I think it's
Yeah,
complicated.
yeah. Last question.
Sure.
And I think this is the critical one. You are so successful in driving this conversation between the community and whoever within the organization, being engineers or product marketeers, are responsible for your offering. Is there any kind of blueprint, if you like, that other companies that are in tech and will, in some shape or form, be impacting community policing, and generally community, it doesn't have to just be policing, can take from your experience?
Yes, I really think the impact of the Ethics and Equity Advisory Council, both in the US and we also have a council in the UK, is so necessary, and we don't see it as much as we should. So we need these folks to be deeply ingrained into the product development process, including training. It doesn't just stop with the product. It starts with like our product managers learning about racial equity and diversity and inclusion. Are they thinking of the right things when they're building tools? And I think Axon is just really groundbreaking in allowing and unveiling the technology around public safety to the community. And I think that voice is becoming even stronger, even at Axon, and we'll have different iterations. I'm really excited for what this growth will look like. But I would definitely hope to see more councils like this in tech companies.
I would share that hope wholeheartedly with you. I'm so amazingly grateful for the time. I wish we had more time, but I always say the conversation doesn't have to end here. So where can people find you, Regina, to learn more, maybe contribute, and just be up to date?
Sure. So I can be reached on LinkedIn at Regina Holloway is my name. And then also my email is regina@axon.com. Love to hear from community and stakeholders to continue this conversation.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody tuning in and watching this as a recorded video. I am hopeful that with more conversations like this, to your hope for the future about technology and community coming more together, we will get in a better place. Thank you so much, Regina. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.